It is June 13, 2019, 6:22 hours, Gulf of Oman. The sun has barely crested the horizon when a wall of fire erupts from the waterline. The MT Front Altair, a Norwegian-owned chemical tanker carrying 75,000 metric tons of methanol, is burning. Thick black smoke curls skyward like a fist raised against the morning. 23 crew members scramble for lifeboats in waters that are, at this moment, among the most contested on the planet. One question hangs in the salt air like the smell of burning fuel. Who did this? And what were they really trying to destroy? But to understand how we got here, we have to go back. Not days, not weeks, years. The Strait of Hormuz is a 21-mile wide choke point between Oman and Iran. Every single day, approximately 21 million barrels of crude oil pass through that narrow channel. That is roughly 21% of global petroleum liquidity, moving through a corridor barely wider than some American counties. The U.S. Energy Information Administration has confirmed these numbers. They are not disputed. They are simply staggering. Whoever controls the Strait of Hormuz holds a hand on the throat of the global economy. The United States has understood this since 1979. That was the year the Iranian Revolution fundamentally rewrote the strategic map of the Middle East. The Carter Doctrine, announced on January 23, 1980, declared, in plain language, that the United States would use military force to defend its national interests in the Persian Gulf. Every administration since has inherited that doctrine. Every administration since has been tested by it. By 2019, our intelligence apparatus had been tracking a dangerous escalation cycle for months. The Trump administration had withdrawn from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal. On May 8, 2018, maximum pressure sanctions had been reimposed. Iranian oil exports, once recovering toward 2 million barrels per day, were being strangled. Iran had publicly warned the world, block our oil, and we will block everyone. Nobody believed they would actually do it. That was our first mistake. Inside the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, the IRGCN, a faction of hardliners had spent 2 years developing asymmetric maritime warfare capabilities. These were not conventional naval officers. These were ideologically committed operatives who had studied the tanker war of the 1980s with surgical precision. Between 1984 and 1988, during the Iran-Iraq War, over 500 ships were attacked in the Gulf. Iran had learned then that you don't need to sink the American carrier group. You just need to terrify the insurance markets. You spike the fear index. You make every underwriter in London and New York price in chaos. And chaos has a cost that shows up everywhere. At the pump, in the markets, in the quiet panic of treasury ministers on 4 continents. By early 2019, according to declassified U.S. Central Command assessments and reporting confirmed by Reuters and the Associated Press, the IRGCN had pre-positioned fast attack craft throughout the Gulf. They had acquired new limpet mine technology. A limpet mine is a magnetic, waterline-level explosive device. It does not sink a ship outright. It punches a hole. It sends a message. The message being sent in June 2019 was addressed to the entire global order. What would you do if you controlled a weapon that could trigger a worldwide recession and you had nothing left to lose? Here is where the system came dangerously close to failing. On May 12, 2019, 1 month before the Front Altair attack, where commercial vessels had already been sabotaged near the port of Fujairah in the UAE. The ships included the Saudi oil tanker Al Marzouka, Norwegian tanker Andrea Victory, Emirati bunkering vessel A. Michel, and UAE flagged Umjad. All 4 were damaged by what U.S. and allied investigators identified as limpet mines. The FBI's counterterrorism division was looped in. The CIA's Near East division was tracking signals intelligence. U.S. 5th Fleet, headquartered in Manama, Bahrain, was on elevated alert. And yet, the tankers kept sailing. The commercial shipping industry, driven by contractual obligations and insurance pressure, kept moving product through the strait. The diplomatic response moved at bureaucratic speed. UN Security Council consultations, State Department communiques, carefully worded statements from allied capital. Meanwhile, the IRGCN read every delay as weakness. There is a classified after-action assessment, portions of which have been discussed in open congressional testimony before the Senate Armed Services Committee, suggesting that our signals intelligence detected pre-operational chatter before the June attacks. The timeline remains classified, but the gap between intelligence awareness and operational response represents what one senior defense analyst, quoted by Foreign Policy magazine in August 2019, described as, and I quote, "a dangerous lag in the decision loop." This wasn't a scene from a Hollywood movie. This was the real machinery of American national security, grinding slowly while the enemy moved fast. Did you know that the United States maintains approximately 35,000 military personnel in the broader Gulf region? Did you know that on June 13, 2019, with 2 tankers burning, the nearest U.S. naval asset, the guided missile destroyer USS Bainbridge, was still 40 nautical miles away when the first explosion hit? 40 miles. In maritime terms, that is both close and impossibly far. Then came the moment everything changed. At approximately 4 o'clock hours UTC on June 13, 2019, a U.S. Navy MQ-9 Reaper drone, operating from a classified forward base under U.S. Air Force's Central Command Authority, captured real-time footage that would become one of the most consequential pieces of intelligence footage since the Cuban Missile Crisis reconnaissance photographs of 1962. The footage showed an IRGCN Gashti-class patrol boat traveling at high speed alongside the stricken Japanese-owned tanker Kakuka Courageous, with uniformed IRGCN personnel removing an unexploded limpet mine from the vessel's hull. This was not alleged. This was not speculated. This was captured on 4K equivalent military-grade optics in real time by U.S. military assets operating within international waters. The Pentagon released portions of that footage publicly on June 13, 2019 at a press briefing conducted by then-Chief Pentagon spokesman Sean Robertson. The images were transmitted within hours to every allied capital, every relevant NATO partner, every Gulf Cooperation Council defense ministry. The IRGCN had returned to remove evidence. They had not anticipated being watched from 25,000 feet. That was their fatal miscalculation. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo appeared before cameras that same day. He stated on the record that the United States held Iran responsible for the attacks based on available intelligence, the weapons used, the level of expertise needed to execute the operation, and the resources and prior similar attacks attributed to Iran. Every element of that statement was backed by classified annexes submitted to the Senate Intelligence Committee. The Kuwaiti government, the Saudi government, the Japanese government, whose Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was, at that very moment, meeting with Supreme Leader Khamenei in Tehran in an attempted diplomatic de-escalation, all received the drone footage in full. Sometimes the truth arrives at the worst possible time, and it changes everything anyway. What followed was not a single dramatic strike. American justice in the strategic arena rarely works that way. It is patient. It is layered. It is built for the long game. Operation Sentinel, later restructured into the International Maritime Security Construct, was announced by the U.S. Department of Defense on July 19, 2019. Its explicit mission: to safeguard freedom of navigation and the free flow of commerce in the Strait of Hormuz, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and the Gulf of Oman. The USS Boxer amphibious assault ship was deployed to the region with a full Marine Expeditionary Unit aboard. Multiple guided missile destroyers were repositioned. P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, the most sophisticated sub-hunting and maritime surveillance platform in the American arsenal, began flying continuous coverage over the Gulf. The rules of engagement were clarified, expanded, and then tested. On July 18, 2019, 5 days before the formal Sentinel announcement, the USS Boxer destroyed an Iranian drone that had approached within 1,000 yards of the vessel and ignored multiple warnings to withdraw. The Secretary of Defense, Dr. Mark Esper, confirmed this publicly. The legal authority was 10 U.S. Code Section 2, the President's authority as Commander-in-Chief, combined with established rules of engagement for self-defense under international maritime law. This was not escalation. This was the exercise of sovereign American military authority on international waters in defense of our sailors. But the legal and intelligence architecture being built around the Hormuz crisis extended far beyond kinetic response. The Department of the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, had by August 2019 imposed the most comprehensive sanctions package ever leveled against the Iranian financial sector. Designation after designation, entity after entity, the Iranian rial had already collapsed to historic lows. Ordinary Iranians were suffering. The IRGCN's ability to source foreign components for its asymmetric warfare program was being systematically dismantled, contract by contract, bank correspondent relationship by bank correspondent relationship. The CIA's Financial Intelligence Unit, working in coordination with FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, began mapping every front company, every shell entity, every third country intermediary the IRGCN used to move money and material. The work was invisible. The work was relentless. Then came January 3, 2020. At approximately 1 o'clock hours local time in Baghdad, Iraq, a U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone operating under a presidential finding and targeting authorization struck a convoy departing Baghdad International Airport. Major General Qasem Soleimani, commander of the IRGC Quds Force, designated as a terrorist by the U.S. government under Executive Order 13224 since 2007, was killed. The Department of Defense confirmed the strike. The President confirmed the order. Secretary of State Pompeo stated publicly that Soleimani had been actively planning attacks against American diplomats and service members. Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, deputy commander of the Popular Mobilization Forces, also designated as a terrorist, was killed in the same strike. The reach of American justice does not stop at our borders. It does not expire. It does not forget. What happened in the Gulf of Oman in June of 2019 was not simply a regional crisis. It was a stress test of the entire post-World War II international order. It was a challenge to 21% of the world's oil supply. It was a direct attack on the principle foundational to American foreign policy since the Truman Doctrine of 1947 that open sea lanes belong to all nations. The 23 crew members of the MT Front Altair were rescued, every single one of them, by an Iranian vessel that, in a moment of profound human complexity, chose to pull survivors from the water before the geopolitical stakes were fully understood. The Kakuka courageous crew were rescued by the USS Bainbridge. American sailors, American warships, American commitment. The insurance market stabilized within weeks, not because the threat disappeared, but because the world saw, once again, that the United States does not abandon its obligations. Not in the South China Sea, not in the Black Sea, not in the Strait of Hormuz at 6:22 on a Thursday morning in June. We have maintained continuous naval presence in the Persian Gulf since 1949, through the Korean War, Vietnam, Desert Storm, September 11, 2 decades in Afghanistan. We were there before the Iranian Revolution. We were there after it. We will be there long after the current chapter of that conflict resolved. That is not aggression. That is commitment. The men and women of U.S. Fifth Fleet, of the CIA's Near East Division, of OFAC Sanctions Enforcement Unit, of the Defense Intelligence Agency's Maritime Targeting Cell, they do not get parades. Their names do not appear in the credits. They operate in the space between the headlines and history. And they are why the dollar still flows, why the lights stay on, why you paid what you paid at the gas pump last week instead of something catastrophically worse. America does not always move fast, but America does not stop moving. And when we finally arrive in a courtroom, on a targeting screen, in a Treasury designation list, we arrive completely. Operation Epic Fury, Operation Sentinel, the Maximum Pressure Campaign, the January strike in Baghdad. These are not separate stories. They are one story. The story of a nation that was tested in a narrow channel of water and did not blink. Here is the question I want you to sit with tonight. If Iran had successfully disrupted Hormuz traffic for 30 consecutive days, what would that have done to the American economy? To your 401k? To the price of everything in your grocery store? We came closer to finding out than most people know. If this documentary opened your eyes to a conflict that most Americans have already forgotten, share it. Someone you know needs to understand what our people do in those waters every single day. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel. Every click tells the algorithm that serious American stories deserve serious American attention. Thank you for watching.